Jackson Hayes had lived through fire, through metal, through nights when the desert wind carried the sound of distant rockets like ghosts whispering in the dark. But nothing in his years of service had prepared him for the quiet, hungry ache of civilian life. It wasn't the kind of ache that struck hard. It was the slow kind, the kind that crept into his bones, into the spaces between thoughts, filling him with a heaviness he couldn't always explain. He had returned from war with a limp that never fully healed, a shoulder that cracked whenever he lifted heavy tools, and memories he tried to bury beneath work and silence. He'd expected to come home to open arms, to opportunity, to some version of the American dream he had carried in his mind during long deployments. Instead, he returned to an economy that didn't care for veterans with half-recovered injuries, to a world that moved too quickly for a man who flinched at sudden noises, and to empty rooms that echoed more loudly than explosions ever had. The only constant he had, the only thing that still made sense, was Bravo. Bravo had come into his life in the middle of a sandstorm on foreign soil. Jackson had found the shepherd pup trembling behind a burned-out vehicle, covered in dust and ash, and he remembered kneeling down, offering water from his canteen, watching the pup lick cautiously, then press close, as if choosing him in an instant. Everyone said it was crazy to get attached, that animals weren't supposed to come home with soldiers, but Jackson had never been good at doing what made sense. He fought for the dog's paperwork with the same stubbornness he showed on missions, and eventually Bravo became part of the unit, a quiet companion who slept beside Jackson's cot, learned his rhythms, and sensed his unease long before any human did. On bad nights, Bravo nudged him awake before the nightmares dragged him too deep. On patrols, Bravo stayed close, eyes sharp, ears constantly swiveling. They survived too much together to ever part ways. When Jackson stepped back into civilian life, Bravo became his shadow, his guardian, his grounding force. In return, Jackson gave Bravo what love he could muster through the fog of exhaustion, grief, and relentless financial struggle. They settled into a small rental house that smelled faintly of mildew, with thin walls and a sputtering heater that rattled like an old man coughing. Jackson patched leaks, repaired hinges, and took on whatever handyman jobs he could find. Some days he fixed fences, other days he replaced old wiring or repaired creaking floorboards. The pay was inconsistent, but he managed, barely. His truck, the old pickup that had served him for years, was one of the few things keeping him afloat. It was his way to work, his tool hauler, his lifeline. So when it died that Sunday morning, coughing out black smoke before the engine exhaled its last breath, Jackson stood beside it in the cold wind, jaw clenched, heart sinking. He rested his palm on the hood, feeling the warmth fade from the metal. Bravo sat beside him, ears lowered, sensing the blow even without understanding engines or bills. Jackson whispered, "Not now, buddy, not now." But machines didn't listen, and life didn't pause out of sympathy. Without a vehicle, he would lose his jobs. Without jobs, he would lose his home. The math was simple, brutal, unforgiving. He spent that afternoon searching through online listings and bulletin boards, looking for anything at all, that had wheels and didn't cost more than the few $100s he still had tucked into an envelope in his kitchen drawer. Most cars were too expensive, too far gone, or too suspiciously cheap. But in the faded corner of a local listing website, he found it. 1971 Ford Torino, runs, mostly, cheap, behind Mix Auto. The picture showed a car so rusted it looked like the earth was trying to reclaim it, but Jackson didn't have the luxury of being picky. He drove out with Bravo riding shotgun in a borrowed neighbor's truck, a silent prayer forming in his chest. The car sat alone behind the mechanic's lot like an abandoned memory. Its paint, once blue, had faded into a grayish patchwork. Rust clawed at the wheel wells and door edges. The interior was torn, stained, and smelled faintly like gasoline, mildew, and something older, maybe time itself. But the engine turned over when the mechanic cranked it, coughing but catching. "She runs," the mechanic had grunted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just don't ask her to run fast." Jackson didn't need fast. He needed functional, so he bought it. Nearly every dollar he had changed hands in that moment, leaving him with only enough for a week of groceries. As he climbed into the driver's seat, Bravo leapt gracefully into the passenger side, tail wagging once as if in approval. Jackson chuckled under his breath. "You like it, huh?" Bravo leaned over and nudged Jackson's arm, and for the first time that day, Jackson allowed himself a small, tired smile. The drive home was slow, the Torino rattling like its bolts were arguing with each other, but it moved. Bravo stuck his head slightly out the window, the cold air ruffling his fur, his eyes bright with curiosity. The moment felt almost peaceful, like a reminder that not all broken things were beyond saving. By the time they reached the driveway, the sun was dipping low behind the houses, painting the sky in warm amber streaks. Jackson parked the Torino, patted the dashboard affectionately, and stepped out into the cooling air. "We'll fix her up," he murmured to Bravo, "piece by piece." Bravo barked once softly, as though sealing a pact neither of them yet understood. Over the next several days, Jackson turned the narrow gravel driveway into his personal repair bay. The Torino sat like a stubborn old mule, waiting to be coaxed back into usefulness, its rusted frame catching the morning light in uneven patches. Jackson dragged out his battered toolbox, the same one he had used overseas to fix generators and field equipment under far worse conditions. He laid the tools out carefully, more from habit than necessity, and set to work. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Oil, dust, old leather, and the faint lingering scent of gasoline trapped in the upholstery. It reminded him of the motor pool on base, of nights spent under open skies repairing vehicles between missions, of a time when things were difficult but at least made sense. He inhaled slowly, letting the familiarity ground him. Bravo stayed close from the moment the work began. The German Shepherd moved with the quiet confidence of a dog who understood routine, purpose, and the fragile state of the man he accompanied. Bravo lay in the shade for a while, eyes following every movement, tail thumping softly whenever Jackson grumbled or muttered under his breath. Sometimes he stood, padded closer, and nudged Jackson lightly as if urging him not to overexert himself. Other times he sniffed around the car with professional seriousness, nose twitching as though he were conducting an inspection. Jackson found comfort in the rhythm of their partnership. He would talk while he worked, letting words slip out naturally, about the stubborn bolts, about memories that resurfaced unexpectedly, about how the world felt too loud some days and too quiet on others. Bravo listened in the way only dogs knew how. Silently, completely, without judgment. The engine needed more love than Jackson expected. Spark plugs were worn, belts cracked, fluids low or questionable. He sank his hands into the guts of the machine, pulling, tightening, cleaning, coaxing life back into metal that hadn't been cared for in years. Sweat dripped from his temples, leaving streaks of dirt down his cheeks, but he felt strangely alive in the struggle. The sun rose high and beat down on him, but the physical effort kept him warm, even when the wind picked up. Every clang of metal, every scrape of a wrench against a bolt became a reminder that problems, at least mechanical ones, could be fixed if he just kept trying. On the third afternoon, as Jackson was half buried under the chassis tightening a bolt that refused to cooperate, Bravo suddenly shifted from his relaxed posture into one of alert focus. His ears stood straight up, his body leaned forward, even his breathing changed. This was the stance Jackson knew better than any command. Bravo had sensed something. It was the same posture he'd used in the desert when something unseen moved beyond the ridge, the same posture that had saved Jackson more than once. The change was immediate and unmistakable. "What is it, buddy?" Jackson asked, sliding out from beneath the car. Gravel dug into his elbows as he pushed himself upright. Bravo didn't glance at him. Instead, the dog trotted to the back door of the Torino and pressed his nose firmly against the old, torn upholstery. He pawed once, twice, then looked back at Jackson with a short, urgent sound in his throat. Jackson wiped greasy hands on his jeans and approached, curiosity pricking at him. The interior of the Torino was in terrible shape, cracked vinyl, loose stuffing poking out, springs visible where the fabric had torn. But Bravo didn't care about the cosmetic damage. He sniffed again, more intensely this time, pawing with deliberate persistence. Jackson frowned and pulled at the edge of the back seat. It resisted at first, the metal frame catching on rusted bolts, but then it shifted slightly. Something inside it clicked. "Hold on," he murmured, pulling harder. The seat gave way more than he expected, lifting enough to expose the thin space beneath it. He pushed it further, and that's when he saw the narrow gap where the cushioning separated from the metal backing. It wasn't a typical factory seam. It was too precise, too intentional. Jackson leaned closer, heart beating faster. He ran his fingers along the gap until they brushed something cold and metallic. Bravo let out a soft bark, as if confirming what Jackson had suspected. Something had been hidden here. With a controlled exhale, Jackson wedged his fingers deeper into the gap and felt the unmistakable edge of a small metal container. The compartment was barely more than a hollowed-out cavity within the frame, cleverly disguised. Jackson tugged gently. The container didn't budge. He tried again, this time with more force, and it scraped free with a metallic groan. He pulled out a small lockbox, rust-spotted, dented at the edges, but surprisingly intact. Its weight surprised him, heavy. Heavier than an empty box should be. Bravo nudged it with his nose, tail stiff but wagging slightly, as though satisfied with the find. Jackson held the lockbox in his lap for a long moment, breathing slowly, instinctively slipping into a soldier's mindset. Hidden compartments, concealed items, intentional placement. Someone had put this here for a reason, someone who didn't want it found easily. The fact that Bravo had noticed it made Jackson trust his dog even more. He brushed dirt from the lid and noticed the faint outline of something on the top, a sticker, faded and peeled, showing only the remnants of a once bright emblem. Jackson squinted. It took a few seconds, but recognition clicked into place. It was the tail end of an Air Force insignia. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, glancing at Bravo. The dog tilted his head, as if expecting Jackson to open it right there. But Jackson's hands were shaking slightly, and his instincts urged caution. Lockboxes always meant secrets, and secrets were never simple. He carried the box inside the house, Bravo following closely, nails clicking against the wooden steps. Jackson set the lockbox on the kitchen table that doubled as his work desk. The rusted lock, corroded from age and neglect, crumbled with little effort. When he lifted the lid, the hinges creaked like old bones protesting after too long a rest. And inside lay a story waiting to change everything. Ethan woke the next morning to the sharp chill of dawn, his breath fogging lightly in the air as sunlight filtered through the half-broken blinds of the small workshop. Rusty wasn't beside his bed like usual. Instead, the dog was sitting upright near the door, tail flicking anxiously, as if waiting for Ethan to open it. The moment Ethan stood, Rusty let out a low whine, nudging at the old metal door leading out to the driveway. Ethan rubbed his eyes, thinking Rusty just needed his morning walk, but the dog's posture was rigid, ears pricked forward, body angled toward the rusted Honda like it was calling him again. Ethan followed slowly, his joints stiff from years of combat injuries, and as soon as he slid the door open, Rusty darted across the concrete floor directly to the car, circling it with sharp, deliberate movements. Something about the dog's behavior made Ethan pause. Rusty wasn't sniffing randomly. He was tracing the same path he made the night before, nose brushing the rusted fender, then the floor beneath. Ethan crouched, running his hand along the corroded edge until he reached the spot where Rusty kept stopping. The metal was uneven, but not entirely rust. There was a strange line, almost like a seam, but not one that should exist on an old Honda. Ethan brushed away more grime, feeling the grit catch under his fingernails, and the more he wiped, the more defined the line became. It was a panel, but a hidden one, covered intentionally beneath layers of paint and corrosion. Rusty barked once, sharp, insistent. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Hidden panels weren't normal in cheap used cars. Hidden panels meant secrets. He pushed to his feet, grabbed a screwdriver, and knelt again, wedging the flat end under the seam. The panel resisted at first, as if welded by time itself, but with a grunt and a twist, the metal gave a groaning pop that echoed across the workshop. Rusty stepped closer, tail low but wagging, as if sensing the significance of the moment. Inside the compartment, cushioned beneath cloth that had yellowed from age, was a small rectangular metal box, not a car part, not an electrical component, something personal, something old. Ethan hesitated before pulling it out, feeling its unexpected weight. It wasn't rusted at all, strange, considering everything else in the car was falling apart. The box must have been sealed tight for years. He carried it inside, Rusty walking in precise steps beside him, never taking his eyes off the box. Ethan placed it on the workbench gently, as though it might break from mishandling. His fingers hovered above the latches. For some reason, he felt nervous. The last time he had opened something unknown, back in combat, it hadn't been anything good. Even now, his hands trembled with a memory he wished he could forget. But Rusty nudged his elbow softly, grounding him. With a slow breath, Ethan unlatched the box. Inside, there was no money, no weapons, nothing dangerous. Instead, there were old photographs carefully stacked and tied with twine, letters, a military patch, a chain with a dog tag attached, and a folded sheet of paper resting at the very bottom, edges browned with time. Ethan's chest tightened. He recognized the symbol on the patch, the emblem of the same division he had served in years ago. His hand shook slightly as he lifted the dog tag, turning it over to read the name stamped into the metal. He froze. Private First Class Owen Marek. He knew that name. Rusty let out a soft whine, sensing the shift in Ethan's breathing. Owen Marek wasn't just a random soldier. He had been one of Ethan's closest friends during deployment. They had shared meals, fears, jokes that made no sense, and dreams of what they would do once they got home. Owen had been young, bright-eyed, full of energy. And then, the day everything went wrong, Owen was one of the men who hadn't made it back. Ethan still remembered the desperate radio calls, the smoke, the chaos. He remembered dragging 2 soldiers to safety and looking for Owen but never finding him. His name had haunted Ethan for years, a shadow clinging to the back of his mind. But what was Owen's dog tag doing hidden inside a rusted car sitting in an abandoned lot miles outside town? Ethan slowly unfolded the yellowed sheet of paper, his eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. It was a letter, addressed to whoever finds this box. Owen's writing. Ethan recognized it instantly. The letter explained that Owen had bought this car secondhand before deployment, used it to drive home, used it to chase dreams he wanted to build after the war. When he realized he might not make it back, he hid the box inside the car, hoping someday someone he trusted, or someone who needed it, would find it. He wrote about fear, about unfinished hopes, about the promise he had made to Ethan on their last night before deployment, that if anything happened to him, he wanted Ethan to know he never regretted serving beside him. Ethan's vision blurred as he reached the final lines, where Owen wrote, "If by some miracle the person reading this is you, Ethan, I want you to know you saved more of us than you realize. And if you're still fighting your battles, I hope this box helps you remember you're not alone." Rusty pressed his head against Ethan's leg, a steady presence that anchored him through the crushing wave of emotion. Ethan hadn't cried in years, not even when he returned home limping and shaken. But now, as he stood in the dim workshop with sunlight touching the edges of Owen's words, something in him cracked open. The weight he had carried silently, the guilt, the grief, the memories he buried so deeply, rose to the surface. But this time, he didn't face it alone. Rusty stayed exactly where he was, tail curled around his paws, watching him with warm, understanding eyes. Ethan knelt and wrapped an arm around the dog, burying his face in Rusty's fur. He felt the warmth, the heartbeat, the comfort he didn't know he had needed so desperately. When he finally stood again, he felt lighter. Not healed, not entirely, but no longer trapped. The discovery Rusty had led him to wasn't just a box, it was a lifeline, a final message from a friend lost in the fog of war, a reminder that he still mattered, that he still had worth. And as Ethan placed the items back in the box, treating them like sacred relics, he looked down at Rusty and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You always know." Rusty wagged his tail once, proud and calm. The car was no longer just a rusted project or a desperate purchase from a struggling veteran. It was now a bridge between past and present, between pain and healing, between a soldier who never made it home and another who still struggled to feel like he belonged in the world. But this discovery, as emotional as it was only the beginning. Rusty seemed to sense there was more tied to that car, more beneath the rust and forgotten metal, more hidden in the shadows of a story that had waited years to be told. And Ethan, for the first time in what felt like forever, was ready to uncover all of it. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. After finding Owen's letter, his mind couldn't settle. Memories long dormant resurfaced with startling clarity. Quiet jokes whispered in foxholes, arguments over whose turn it was to heat rations, the relentless sun beating down during long patrols, the night Owen gave him half his water without hesitation. Ethan could hear his voice again, bright, stubborn, hopeful. He could feel the weight of what they endured together, the weight he had carried alone for far too long. And now, because of Rusty, that weight had shifted. Not vanished, just shared. By dawn, the workshop glowed with a pale golden light. Dust floated lazily through the beams, and the rusted Honda sat silent and still, like it was waiting. Rusty lay curled near the workbench where the box rested, as though guarding it through the night. When Ethan stirred, the dog immediately rose, stretched, and looked at the car with renewed urgency. It was clear Rusty believed their work there wasn't finished. Ethan approached the vehicle slowly, running a hand over the battered hood. "What else are you hiding?" he muttered gently, as if speaking to an old friend. He opened the driver's door, its hinges squealing in protest. He combed through the interior once more, under the seats, beneath the floor mats, inside the trunk, but nothing stood out. Until Rusty began pawing at the back seat, scratching lightly at the fabric along the seam near the seatbelt latch. "Again?" Ethan asked, tired but curious. Rusty barked once, firm and certain. Ethan pressed his fingers along the seam. At first, it felt like normal upholstery. Then he felt something uneven, a slight bulge beneath the fabric. He grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the narrow gap, revealing a piece of metal tucked deep under the seat frame. A different color than the car's body, cleaner, almost deliberate. He used a wrench to unbolt the seat, dragging it forward with effort. Beneath it lay another panel, smaller than the first, but clearly man-made. His heart picked up pace. Why would Owen go to such lengths to hide something? And why here? Rusty sat beside him, tail sweeping slowly, as if telling him it was okay. With hands steadier than before, Ethan pried open the second compartment. Inside was a small wooden box, its surface carved with intricate patterns. Patterns Ethan recognized from Owen's stories about his grandfather, a craftsman who carved memories into wood like others wrote them on paper. The lid was sealed with a thin strip of leather, untouched by decay, as though someone had protected the box carefully before placing it here. Ethan unwrapped the leather gently. Inside the box lay a carefully folded American flag, one small enough to be personal, not ceremonial, along with another letter, sealed in a thin plastic sleeve. The sight of the flag made Ethan's throat tighten. He lifted it with reverence, feeling the weight of its meaning. Owen had carried this. Owen had chosen to hide it. Owen had wanted it preserved. He set it aside and opened the second letter. The handwriting was different, older, heavier strokes. It was written by Owen's father. "To my son," the letter began, the words trembling even on paper. "In case this reaches you when I no longer can speak the words myself." Ethan inhaled sharply. He read on. The letter told a story he had never known. Owen's father had served years before them. He had survived his own battles, carried his own scars, and passed down the wooden box to Owen when he enlisted. It contained not money or valuables, but legacy, a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and family honor. Owen's father explained that every generation had added a mark or carving to the wooden box, each line representing a hard lesson learned, a moment where giving up would have been easier, but choosing to stand anyway defined them instead. Ethan traced the patterns with his thumb, marveling at the precision. He imagined Owen sitting with it before deployment, listening to his father's stories. The letter revealed that Owen hid the box in the car because he didn't want it lost to war. If he didn't come home, he wanted someone he trusted to find it, someone who understood what it meant to carry the unseen burdens of service. Owen always spoke of you, the letter read, with a loyalty I seldom witnessed in young men. He said if he couldn't return, maybe you would understand this legacy better than anyone else. Ethan stopped reading, overcome by a mixture of grief and gratitude so powerful it left him breathless. Rusty nudged him softly, sensing the shift in his emotions. Ethan let his palm rest on Rusty's head, grounding himself in the steady warmth of his companion. But the letter wasn't finished. With trembling effort, Ethan continued. I don't know what your battles will be, Owen's father wrote, but if this box finds its way to you, I believe it means you're still fighting. Whatever weight you carry, let this remind you, you are not alone. My son trusted you, so do I. Ethan felt something loosen deep inside his chest, something he hadn't even realized had been clenched for years. He sat back against the cold cement floor, staring at the wooden box as if it might speak. Rusty rested beside him, pressing his side gently against Ethan's. The old car, once nothing more than a desperate purchase, was now a vessel of memories, trust, and messages that had survived beyond death. It felt almost sacred now, as if time itself had guarded these secrets until Ethan was ready to find them. He spent hours studying each carving on the wooden box, running his fingers over the grooves, trying to see the meaning in each mark. Rusty lay quietly near him, occasionally lifting his head to watch Ethan, occasionally nudging the box like he understood its importance. By late afternoon, Ethan realized something. These discoveries weren't random. Owen had left them with intention, and Rusty, somehow, seemed to sense exactly where they were hidden. His loyal dog wasn't just finding objects, he was guiding Ethan through a journey he didn't know he needed. When Ethan finally carried the wooden box into the living room, placing it on the table beside Owen's dog tag and the letters, he felt a shift inside him, a quiet warmth, a fragile peace. For the first time in years, the cabin felt less empty. The silence felt less heavy. The shadows felt less threatening. Rusty curled at Ethan's feet as if guarding not just him, but also the memories now resting between them. But the story wasn't finished yet, because Ethan still didn't know why this car had ended up abandoned. He still didn't know if there was something more Owen wanted him to find. And Rusty, eyes bright, tail twitching, seemed to believe the journey was far from over. And Ethan, for the first time in a long time, felt ready to follow wherever it led. The next morning, sunlight poured through the broken windows of the cabin, illuminating every dust particle in a golden haze. Ethan sat at the table, Rusty beside him, staring at the wooden box, the dog tag, and the letters that now carried the weight of decades of history. The events of the previous day had left him emotionally drained, but a quiet determination had begun to take root. There was more to uncover, he knew. Rusty's behavior had never been random. If the dog insisted on guiding him, there had to be a reason. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and went back outside, the cold air biting at his cheeks. Rusty bounded ahead, nostrils flaring as he traced paths around the rusted car, the workshop, and the small yard surrounding the cabin. It was as if the dog was remembering a path long forgotten, leading him somewhere specific. Ethan followed, careful not to rush, aware that patience had been the key to every discovery so far. Rusty stopped suddenly near the base of a gnarled old oak tree at the edge of the property. His paws scratched at the dirt, tail wagging furiously. Ethan knelt and began digging where Rusty indicated. At first, it seemed like nothing, just earth and roots and time itself pressed into a compact mass. But then his hands hit something hard. Rusty barked, circling excitedly. Ethan brushed the dirt away and uncovered a metal box, smaller than the one inside the car, but equally sealed. The rusted lid creaked open, revealing its contents. Inside were several small bundles wrapped in oilcloth, each marked with dates from decades ago, along with a small leather journal. Ethan's heart raced. This was no ordinary discovery. This was history, personal history, intertwined with the life of a friend he thought he had lost forever. The journal belonged to Owen. Not the one Ethan remembered, but the Owen who had grown up before war, whose thoughts and dreams were now preserved in ink. The entries were filled with small joys, fears, and the longing for someone who could understand him. He wrote of his family, of the hardships they endured, of the sacrifices that had been demanded of him, and the men he fought alongside. The bundles contained keepsakes, dog collars, photographs, medals from campaigns, letters he had written to loved ones that never reached their intended recipients. Each item told a story, each entry a piece of a puzzle that connected the past and present in ways Ethan could barely comprehend. Rusty nudged at one of the oilcloth bundles, as if impatient for Ethan to discover its contents. Ethan unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small, worn dog collar with a brass tag. His fingers traced the engraving. Owen's first service dog, Max. Memories of Owen laughing as Max bounded through the training grounds came flooding back. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Max had been more than a companion. He had been a symbol of loyalty, courage, and resilience, the very qualities Owen had carried into every aspect of his life. Now, through Rusty, that same loyalty was guiding Ethan to these treasures, to a connection he thought had been severed forever. Hours passed as Ethan carefully examined each item, reading every letter, handling each relic with reverence. Rusty remained at his side, occasionally resting his head on Ethan's knee, a silent reassurance that he was not alone. By late afternoon, Ethan had pieced together a story that spanned decades, the life of a friend lost to war, the dreams he had hoped to fulfill, the fears he had never voiced, and the love he had for those who remained. He realized that Owen had left these items not as a message of despair, but as a guide, a testament to the enduring power of loyalty, both human and canine. Ethan placed the wooden box from the car atop the treasures from the yard, forming a small shrine to a life that had been interrupted, yet preserved. Rusty sat back, eyes gleaming, as if approving of Ethan's understanding. In that moment, Ethan understood the depth of the bond he shared with Rusty, not merely a companion who led him to discoveries, but a living link to the past, a guide who could navigate both grief and hope. With renewed resolve, Ethan decided to honor Owen's memory. He contacted old comrades, visited towns they had trained in together, and shared the story of the hidden treasures. Each photograph, letter, and keepsake he had uncovered became a testament to a life lived fully, a story that needed to be remembered. Veterans and civilians alike were touched by the narrative. Many moved to tears by the courage, sacrifice, and loyalty displayed across generations. Rusty, ever vigilant, became a local symbol of steadfast companionship, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could be unearthed, sometimes literally, from the most unexpected places. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan transformed the cabin into a place of remembrance and reflection. He installed shelves to display the artifacts, created a small archive of the letters, and even wrote down his own experiences, intertwining his memories with Owen's and the lives of those who had served alongside them. Visitors were welcomed, and stories were shared. The cabin, once a lonely, desolate place, became a sanctuary of history, memory, and honor, a testament to what one loyal dog could uncover and the ripple effect it could create. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Ethan sat on the porch with Rusty at his feet. The wind carried the faint scent of the sea from the distant pier, and the quiet stillness enveloped them. He held Owen's letters in one hand, the dog tag in the other, and felt a profound connection, not just to the friend he had lost, but to life itself, to the enduring bonds of loyalty, and to the unexpected ways in which love and remembrance can manifest. Rusty looked up at him, eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, and Ethan whispered, "We did it, buddy. We found it all. We honored him." Rusty wagged his tail once, gently, as if in agreement. And in that moment, Ethan knew that the journey they had undertaken was more than about uncovering hidden treasures. It was about understanding the true meaning of loyalty, the power of companionship, and the enduring impact of those we love. The cabin, the car, the buried treasures, they were all symbols of a life preserved, a friendship honored, and a story that would now live on forever. As night fell, Ethan felt a peace he had never known. The cabin, once haunted by silence and solitude, now resonated with history, memory, and the soft heartbeat of Rusty sleeping beside him. And though the world outside remained unpredictable and harsh, within those walls he understood something profoundly simple and true. Loyalty, love, and courage can transcend time, and sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in gold or silver, but in the bonds that guide us home.